Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when John Key is protecting his own interests, he is not working in the interests of all New Zealanders. When John Key stands up and defends for his own interests and his own political future, he is not standing up for the interests of New Zealanders or for the democracy which he has pledged to serve. What he does when he defends himself against these serious, very serious findings by the Inspector General is he completely dismisses his role as a servant of New Zealand's people and an upholder of the democracy that has been fought for in this country and by others. Mr. Speaker, what we saw today by John Key and his behaviour in the House and the disgraceful personal attacks particularly by the SIS Minister, that John Key and his people are here only to protect themselves and the rest of New Zealand can be damned. He's shown utter contempt for the security of our national intelligence services, for the parliamentary democracy and again for the people of New Zealand. What we really saw today was John Key treating this serious issue of a major abuse of power, and here we go, we can hear the Minister, SIS Minister Chris Finlayson, no doubt making more personal attacks, as is his wont. But Mr John Key has shown today that he treats this
I
Parliament...
apologise for interrupting the member. I just want to say to the Honourable Minister, anything that I said today wasn't disgusting, and I think that he should, if he's going to interject in that manner, make sure that he follows the rules of the House. Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. John Key has shown today that he treats this place and the job, the public service role that he has as some kind of game, where you score the points for being the trickiest, not for being the most ethical, not for upholding high standards, but for being tricky. Well, let me say very clearly, our democracy is not a game. We are not here just to win at any cost. This is about serving the New Zealand public, not to mock them. And it's not okay under any circumstances for John Key or any Prime Minister to run a black ops scheme from the 9th floor of the Beehive, no matter how tricky he thinks he is or how much he tries to bat off questions in the House. The public of New Zealand deserve significantly better than that. They deserve answers, not sleights of hand. A Prime Minister who upholds the integrity and the ethical standards that New Zealanders expect from their office. And for all the dispute around the findings of the Inspector General's report, what is very clear from the report is that John Key's office was engaged in a deliberate smear campaign, and they would use political information provided to them from government agencies as critical to New Zealand's security as the SIS for party political purposes in an election campaign. Now, you can't stand it. Stephen Joyce tried to stand up and do this, and so did Bill English, and no doubt others will as we go on. You simply cannot stand here in this Parliament and tell New Zealanders that that is ethical behaviour by John Key and his office. He did know. He employed Jason Eade precisely for that purpose, to run smear campaigns out of the 9th floor in the Beehive. John Key allowed Jason Eade to use secret email and phone accounts to dig dirt on political opponents and to attack them during an election campaign. And not only that, but to use information that was received by John Key and by his office through the SIS. The advisor then destroyed those records. The advisor destroyed those records that's set out in the report, and John Key says that that is okay. He's quite relaxed about that behaviour of his own staff in his own office. The Inspector General of the Security and Intelligence Service found that staffers in John Key's office were using SIS information for political purposes. And John Key thinks that that's perfectly fine, that that is a fine ethical standard for him to maintain. The Inspector General found that Jason Eade used SIS information to tell Cameron Slater what to ask for in an OIA, that Slater and Eade were on the phone together when the OIA request was written, and that Eade had even drafted up a blog for Cameron Slater about that OIA. So the Prime Minister employed Jason Eade to write blogs for Cameron Slater. That is the level of disgraceful standard that the Prime Minister allows in his office, accepts in his office. The people of New Zealand paid Jason Eade's wages to write draft blogs for Cameron Slater and to dig dirt on political opponents and to misuse information provided by government agencies to the Prime Minister for that party political purposes in an election campaign. And John Key says that that's okay. For John Key, that is a fine ethical standard to maintain in his office. So despite the desperate spin that we're going to hear from National, and they're trying all sorts of distraction techniques today, and we'll hear more probably over the next few days, and we heard some of the faux outrage today as well from National, the Inspector General confirms a serious abuse of power by this government, by John Key and his office. The report vindicates Nicky Hager and his most serious allegations in the Dirty Politics book. During the recent campaign, John Key said that the events that were outlined in the book were baseless allegations. He used that quite often. But the Inspector General's report shows that the Prime Minister was wrong to say that it was baseless allegations, and confirms that the most serious allegation in the book is actually true. Yes, John Key operated a black ops operation out of his office. His own staff were involved in that, and he gave approval for that. Because there is no way that those people could have operated like that in his office if he did not approve of those actions. Now, this is a huge abuse of power. It is not a political game. It's an abuse of the most powerful office in the country. It was first uncovered by Nicky Hager in his book and has now been confirmed by the Inspector General of the Intelligence Services. Now, John Key is denying it. We all expected that he would, and he would bluster, as we saw his behaviour today. Hasn't treated the issue with any degree of seriousness. Hasn't addressed the public on the core issues here about the ethical standards and the integrity that he expects out of his office. He said instead that it's contestable that his Deputy Chief of Staff got an SIS briefing on the 25th of July. That it's contestable that the information was passed on to Jason Eade, who then talked to Cameron Slater to write an OAA. So the Prime Minister is now saying that the findings of the Auditor General in her report are contestable, the findings of fact that she made. Now, her findings were based on interviews with the Prime Minister's former Deputy Chief of Staff, who was quoted in the report as saying that he wished that Eade had given the information to a real journalist and not to Cameron Slater. Slater and Eade's phone records were used to determine the facts of these matters, and John Key yet again says that this information is contestable. It is absolutely a game of spin that John Key is playing. He is not being honest with the public of New Zealand or treating them with the respect that they deserve. This is an issue that deserves a direct and sincere communication from the Prime Minister, thank you Mr Speaker, not the spin and game playing that we are seeing today, and we will no doubt continue to see. It also raises concerns about whether this culture of grime that is coming from the Prime Minister's office is bleeding elsewhere. Because what we've got now is in 2 elections, we have the directors of the SIS interfering in the election campaign. We first of all, of course, Dr Warren Tucker with the allegations that have now been proved accurate by the Inspector General in allowing information and failing to meet his political neutrality requirements and allowing information to be used for party political purposes by John Key in an election campaign in 2011. And then again with Rebecca Kitteridge making statements defending the Prime Minister's office when those allegations were raised in Nicky Hager's book before the Inspector General's findings were completed. If this is the culture that John Key allows in his office with practically zero ethical standards and no integrity, of course it is going to bleed through into some of those major agencies and the public service if that's how they think that they need to deal with John Key and his people. Of course there will be this interference, and we must be protecting the public service from this kind of political grimy culture that is coming out of the Prime Minister's office. Mr Speaker, We have said over and over the Prime Minister should step aside while a Royal Commission is undertaken into the full allegations. Prime Minister needs to make a clear commitment to the public of New Zealand that he takes this seriously, because time and time again the allegations are being proved true. It's about his integrity, it's about the ethical standards that he employs. Over and over, we are seeing John Key, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, failing New Zealanders, acting in his own interests, and instead allowing New Zealanders to suffer this continual abuse of power. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
Mr. Speaker, what we've just heard